The series of films is all about the search for elusive truth. When it comes to important things, most people value the truth very highly. As the great hero Chelsea Manning once said, "I prefer painful truth over blissful fantasy." So teaching the subject is therefore a kindness, hence the name of this project, the School of Kindness. It isn't absolutely necessary for you to have seen my first film, which was an introduction to the School of Kindness, but if you have seen it, it might help you to better understand some of the concepts I'll be talking about today. This talk on the subject of leadership is essentially in two main parts. Firstly, I'll be taking a look at the concept of leadership, and in the second part I'll explain a bit about the alternative to leadership, leaderless organisation, and how, far from being some sort of wacky new idea, it's actually been around for ages, hundreds of years at the very least. I think it's fairly safe to say that today the following words would be considered scurrilous heresy in almost every corner of the world. Leadership is grossly overrated. And the first object of this talk is to prove that. I'd just like to begin by mentioning that as a young man I was trained to be an army officer, and that some years later I also worked as a team leader in a large department of the British Civil Service. In other words, I've had first-class training in leadership, and I've also had quite a bit of first-hand experience at doing it. I've chosen this subject as my second talk because of its considerable importance to how our society is organised. The concept of leadership is at the very heart of this organisation, so I believe it's vitally important to examine it in some detail. I explained in my introductory film that leaders cannot be trusted, and I will prove this over and over again in nearly all of my films. So the obvious question is, if leaders cannot be trusted, what are the implications for societies that are wholly organised on the concept of leadership? So let's just begin with a quick reminder of a couple of the well-known proofs that leaders cannot be trusted, and which I mentioned earlier in my last film. For example, there's the well-documented account of Lloyd George, British Prime Minister during the First World War, who admitted the deceit of leaders when he said that if the British people were told the truth about the war, it would be over by the very next day. And there was Churchill, British Prime Minister during the Second World War, who said that during wartime, which is a permanent condition as far as all British governments are concerned, he believed that lying is an absolute necessity of government, that nothing is as precious as lies. And of course everyone now knows about how the world was lied to by the great trusted leaders of the US and Britain when they launched their illegal war in Iraq in 2003. As I write these words, new lies are being spewed out about events in Syria and the Ukraine, and many other parts of the planet that are blighted by the world's most powerful leaders. Lying to the people by these great trusted leaders and their flunkies is completely routine. Whole books are written on the subject. I've got a couple here just to sort of prove the point. Rise of Political Lying, for example. And there's The Politics of Lying, which is another one. There's Bodyguard of Lies, which I mentioned in my last film. Irving Stone's superb biography, which is titled All Governments Lie. Another superb book, The First Casualty by Phil Knightley. This is a must-read book, but the First Casualty refers to a quotation that the first casualty in war is always truth. And so anyway, that's just a bit of an indication of the fair number of books that are given over to the subject of how governments routinely lie to us. So where was I? So let's return to that first obvious question about leadership. If we can't trust these most powerful of leaders to tell us the truth, and given the mountain of evidence of their treachery we know we can't, so why on earth do we continue to tolerate the existence of a system wholly based on deceitful leadership? A system that's based on giving so much power to people we know we can't trust? Why do we continue to allow that? Might it be because we think there is no alternative? After all, that particular lie, the "there is no alternative" lie, is a powerful controlling tool, much loved by these great leaders. We're all conditioned to believe it. But there are always alternatives. So let's look a little deeper into this thing we call leadership, and which our fine trusted leaders believe is so essential to how society works. What exactly is it? Leadership is the key device that's used to condition the vast majority of us into dumb and mindless servitude. We're conditioned from birth to trust leaders, to not only trust them, but in the cases of kings and queens and presidents and popes and the like, to worship them. Some people might think that word conditioned is too strong. But I remember seeing a documentary not very long ago which showed a US Marine with that vacant, dead-eyed look that's so common to many soldiers. And I remember him saying, with complete sincerity, "I would slit my own throat for my president." And if these young fools would do such a stupid thing, what other horrors might they perpetrate for their beloved president? So please believe me, the word conditioned is not too strong. It's quite possible that there are a few very exceptional situations when we might be better off if we were led by someone ordering us around. If we're suddenly called on to resist invasion by an enemy army, perhaps. But because armed invasions are now fairly rare in first world countries, and would be rarer still if permanent war was a thing of the past, and if we had a proper international justice, such situations could be excluded from this discussion. What concerns me here is not these minutely rare events, but our everyday life in general, and the normal daily business of government in particular. Except in very, very rare situations, we do not need leaders at all. We do need organisation, and we do need a system of equitable and trusted decision-making. But neither of those essential processes is dependent on leaders. Groups of people are perfectly capable of organising themselves without leaders and managing their own equitable decision-making, if given the chance to do so, as tens of thousands of worker cooperatives around the world have been proving for many, many years. Our conditioning to leadership to invest all of our trust in leaders is a bit like conditioning farm animals to trust the farmer or the butcher. The leaders that comprise our world at all levels appear to come in two types: dictator or democrat. I say they appear to come in two types because what we actually have are dictators who are open about the fact that they are dictators, and we have the great trusted leaders of most Western governments who pretend to be democrats, but who are in fact just as dictatorial as any other tyrant. These people are arguably worse than honest tyrants because of their deceit, because of the crucial part they play in the illusion we call democracy. The most obvious example of this is President Obama, supposedly the most democratic of all leaders, but who, according to writer and investigative journalist Jeremy Scahill, spends his Tuesday afternoons signing off kill lists of defenseless people living in distant countries and targeted for murder by officials working for this great champion of freedom and democracy. This is Scahill's book, Dirty Wars. It's a superb read, an absolute must-read. At least one of these victims of presidential murder, Mr. Anwar Laki, was a US citizen, who therefore had his constitutional right to judicial process casually ignored by this fine leader of the free world, this supposed expert in constitutional law, this ludicrous Nobel Peace Prize winner. If casual, unaccountable extrajudicial murder is not exactly the same behaviour as that of any common tyrant, it's difficult to know what is. If the murderous cynicism of the most powerful leader in the world is not enough to permanently ridicule the concept of leadership itself, it's difficult to know what might be. Of course, there's nothing exceptional about Obama. He's only doing what any other incumbent of his job would do. And he's simply the most powerful exponent of what tens of thousands of lesser leaders do every day of their sinister lives. If that seems an unduly harsh comment, consider the words of Joel Bacon, whose first-class book, The Corporation, holds up a magnifying glass to these terrible institutions which now completely blight our planet. Bacon points out, and I quote, "The corporation's legally defined mandate is to pursue relentlessly and without exception its own self-interest, regardless of the often harmful consequences it might cause to others. Many people would find its personality abhorrent, even psychopathic in a human being. Corporations are, of course, run by human beings, leaders all. Leaders we're all conditioned to regard with envy and awe instead of disgust, which would be a far more appropriate emotion to feel about those in charge of these monstrous organizations. All countries are organized in hierarchical structures, with some hugely wealthy and powerful king, emperor, generalissimo, or president perched at the very top as the supreme leader, and a vast mass of ordinary people with very little personal wealth or power at the bottom. It's like a vast triangle. Within the triangle are many smaller triangles of various sizes, some quite large, such as government departments or national corporations, for example, and some pretty small, like an ordinary high street shop, say. But each of these triangles is a miniature model of the huge triangle that contains them all, with some relatively rich and powerful controlling leader at the top, and a number of relatively poor and powerless minions at the bottom. The larger triangles have triangles within triangles, with various junior leaders presiding over the very own little triangle, but who are themselves subservient to the leaders of other, bigger triangles. This is basically how almost every society is organized, with relatively powerful leaders atop a multitude of triangles of different sizes, all supported by bases of powerless minions. The leaders have absolute control of the minions through the use of the carrot and the stick, reward and punishment. It's something we all know and recognize as completely normal. But if we ask why we have leaders controlling all these triangles of organization, only one sensible answer presents itself. We have leaders because we don't have the choice not to have them. Leaders are imposed on us by other leaders, and they are a natural result of thousands of years of human history. Most leaders love being leaders, and seldom voluntarily choose to be anything else. Given the power, wealth, and prestige that nearly always goes with a position of leader, together with a powerful propaganda machine that relentlessly extols leadership as a noble virtue and absolute necessity, that's fairly understandable. The normal day job of all leaders is to make decisions, which the minions below them must act upon, no questions asked. When the decisions made by leaders benefit the lowliest minions as a whole, at least as much as the leader himself, we could argue leaders do a good and worthwhile job. But apart from the leaders of small triangles, however, some of whom sometimes do very good work, the hard fact of the matter is that the leaders of big triangles, generally speaking, don't give a fig for lowly minions. And the bigger the triangle, and the further removed the leader is from the minions, the less they care. Indeed, people who might care about the lowly minions are actively weeded out and prevented from ever leading big triangles. The proof of this is blindingly obvious. All we have to do is take a step back and look objectively at the evidence. All we have to do is glance at the state of our planet after thousands of years of decision-making by an endless succession of the great and fine leaders of big triangles. Consider, we have massive global poverty with millions of people who quite literally don't know where their next meal is coming from, at the very same time as we have individual leaders with more personal wealth than entire countries put together. In fact, a recent report by Oxfam revealed that the richest 85 people in the world, no doubt all great and fine leaders, these 85 fine leaders have more personal wealth than half of the planet's human population, 3.5 billion people. Almost unbelievably, there are some who think this is a good thing. Leaders themselves, no doubt. Furthermore, and not unrelated to this obscene wealth injustice, we have worldwide plundering and devastation of the planet's fragile ecosystem, such that fish are disappearing from the seas, rainforests, the very lungs of the world, are all but permanently destroyed, and wilderness areas are being killed off by the needs of a relentless human population growth. Our countries are controlled by a ruthless economic system that's absolutely indistinguishable in character from the way in which organized crime works, except for the fact that legitimate gangsters are more open and honest than the fine trusted leaders who run the economies of countries. And arguably the most obscene abomination of them all, permanent war, is directly attributable to the decision-making of the great trusted leaders of the biggest triangles. Given the fact that it's leaders who make all the decisions that cause all these outrages, it's abundantly clear where the responsibility lies. In other words, it isn't possible for any rational human being to conclude anything except the obvious fact that as a means of organizing society for the benefit of the planet in general and human society in particular, leadership is not just a total failure, it's an utter disaster, a global catastrophe. Leadership exists for one reason and one reason only: the personal benefit of leaders. And there are at least 85 fine examples who provide outstanding, irrefutable evidence of that fact.